What's up guys, and welcome back to another video of my Stanced POS. Today we're going to be taking a look at this skid plate. So it's actually holding up pretty well, but I had some modifications made so that I can tuck these bolts into these standoffs so that I'm not scraping them. I had some spacers welded in here earlier, but since I switched back to the OEM headers, I got more ground clearance. So I cut these standoffs shorter so that the skid plate would also sit higher. And I just needed to get something welded inside of them again so that there is a mounting surface for the bolts to sit inside here. For those of you that don't know, this skid plate is from Primitive Racing. It's 3/16" thick aluminum. Although it is aluminum, it is actually pretty strong. As you can see, it's been holding up pretty good, and I put it through a lot of stuff. But these holes were for my wastegates from when I had the Killer Bee headers. Since I no longer have the external wastegates, these are kind of pointless, but that's whatever. Here's the company sticker, Primitive Racing. And then since this is aluminum, you can only weld aluminum to it. For those of you that don't know, you can't weld steel and aluminum together. So these are the front standoffs that they originally came with. As you can see, they're riveted to here. That's because the standoffs themselves are stainless steel, while the plate is aluminum. So they use those rivets to fasten it instead of welding. These standoffs have actually been awesome. I really like the design. I really like how the bolt head sits inside of the standoff. The only thing I didn't like was this. So this is actually a smaller hole before, and it just had enough room for the bolt to go through, and then the bolt head would sit on the outside of this plate with a washer. And the only issue with that was that that bolt head was the lowest point in the plate, and then that scraped the ground all the time. So you're just wearing down that bolt head, and eventually it's going to be very hard to take off when it comes time to take this off. And also you can scrape through that bolt head all the way, and then you would eventually lose your mounting point in the rear for this skid plate. So that's why I modified it. So here's the other side of the skid plate. This is the side that mounts to the car. These dents over here are from my Killer Bee headers, but I no longer have those, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. But this is what they left behind. Here are the stainless steel standoffs in the front that I was talking about. Super nice, super strong. Now these are the aluminum one. It's basically just an aluminum pipe welded to the plate itself. Now these used to be like 2 inches tall or something like that, but I had them cut down shorter. So they're about 1 inch long now. And then at the very top, I had aluminum washers welded all across the top here. So now it used to just be an open pipe, so there was no surface here for the bolt to seat against. But now that I have this here, I can put the bolt all the way inside the standoff. The bolt will be protected from the ground because it's tucked inside, and then this is how it's going to mount to the car. So I just want to let you guys know and show you that's how I modified mine to work. This skid plate does hang lower than the OEM one if you do not modify it. But after these modifications, you have all the bolt heads protected from scraping the ground, and then you also have something that sits pretty much the same height as the OEM one, as long as you do a modification similar to this one. So this is the guy that did the welding for me, Reckless Fabrications. So if you guys are in Hawaii and you're looking for any fabrication or welding needs, this is the guy to go to. Also, shout out to Ben. He was the one that picked up the skid plate for me, and he was the one that had the plug and the hookup in order to get all this work done. So I'm very thankful for that. So right now we're going to go to Home Depot and pick up some 3/8 bolts for these in the rear. So the OEM welded nuts that used to be on the subframe where this mounts to, I snapped those welds a long time ago. So basically all I do now is I just use a bolt and a nut as opposed to just a bolt, because there's nothing for the bolt to thread into anymore. The ones in the front are M10, I believe. Oh, it's M8, I think. M8 by 1.25. So if you're looking to replace the bolts in the front, well, actually that's the rear too, if you haven't snapped the welds like I did. Yeah, so it's M8 by 1.25. That's the bolt thread pitch for the bolts that mount the skid plate. So we're gonna go to Home Depot, and then I think I'm gonna get those socket cap screws, so the ones that actually use Allen keys as opposed to regular hex heads, because I don't think a socket will be small enough to fit inside the standoff to torque the bolt head side of the fastener down. So yeah, we're gonna go to Home Depot, check out what we can find, and then I'll show you. And then we'll get it back on the car and we'll be good to go. And then we'll be back to street sweeping. Alright, so we just got back from Home Depot. So this is the hardware that originally came for the front standoffs. These go right in here. It's just a regular M8 by 1.25 bolt and washer. What I actually did was picked up these two lock washers to kind of help keep those in place. One of the things I noticed is when you hit this skid plate on the ground a ton, these nuts and bolts actually start to loosen up, and then the skid plate droops down. So there was a couple points in time where I was actually driving and dragging the skid plate, so that wasn't good. We want everything to stay tight and secure. So these are the cap screws I ended up picking up. So these are just 1 inch, 3/8 diameter, 16 threads per inch. This is the original welded nut that's usually on the subframe for the rear mounting points. So as you can see, I snapped those welds off. So that was for the original M8 bolts, but I made them larger, and we're now going to be using these 3/8 bolts instead. And then we got some lock washers, regular washers, and then flange nuts to hold it all together in the rear. So now we're going to go ahead and jack the front of the car up, get it on jack stands, and then put this skid plate back on. Alright, so here's the skid plate all bolted up. You can see where it bolts up to the subframe there. And now the bolt heads are tucked inside, protected from the ground. So that's super nice. Here's the fronts. And now everything is good to go.